Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. South Korea's new daily COVID-19 infections, as we heard from our Kim Yeon-sung before, remained over 4,000 for the fifth day in a row on Sunday. Officials say they are slightly concerned about the potential for an uptick in cases ahead of, perhaps after, the five-day Lunar New Year holiday, which starts at the end of this month. Some good news is that the number of critically ill patients has been falling relatively quickly. Remember when it was over 1,000 just a couple of weeks ago, Mo-kyun? Now it's just over 600.
And like we touched upon, revised social distancing rules are now in place. They started today and will run through February 6th, which takes it past the end of the Lunar New Year holiday. The 9 p.m. curfew on restaurants and cafes stays in place, but the limit on the size of private gatherings has been lifted to 6 from 4, presumably so families can get together more easily. For more, we connect to Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Whitney Women's Hospital in Seoul. Good morning, Dr. Tan.
Good morning.
So, Doctor, I want to start with the new social distancing rules. They seem to have been drawn up with the upcoming holiday in mind, like we mentioned. How concerned are you about another uptick after the holiday, and what would you suggest to people?
Well, of course, gathering, mixing, traveling, being in a crowded indoor space, these are still major risk factors for transmission of COVID-19. This has not changed. The difference now is that we're dealing with the Omicron variant, which is much more transmissible than the Delta variant. So all of these risks are actually enhanced, and they will be during the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday. So the safest way to gather still, unfortunately this year, is online. If you are going to gather in person, the safest way to gather is to remember VBT. Everyone should be vaccinated, boosted, and preferentially tested before gathering, especially if there are high-risk individuals, such as elderly relatives that will be part of the group. If you are going to gather, please keep your gatherings small. Avoid crowded indoor spaces, and remember all of the other infectious disease prevention and control measures that we have been adhering to for the last 2 years. Hand sanitizing, properly wearing a mask, and this is important. Make sure that you are wearing a proper mask and you're wearing it properly. So it must be tight-fitting. And in addition, make sure that you're ventilating and disinfecting all of your indoor spaces.
Of course, but it also makes it difficult considering the fact that many people are going to be taking the KTX, the high-speed train here. They're going to be cooped up with hundreds of people for a few hours, perhaps taking a bus for a few hours. So there's that extra risk just traveling to the place you want to go. But we've been seeing this rise in the number of imported cases into South Korea recently. A lot of people are attributing this to the rampant spread of Omicron internationally. When it comes to the numbers we're seeing in South Korea, we're seeing over 4,000 a day. Are the majority of them still the Delta strain, or is it increasingly becoming more Omicron cases?
Well, the most recent statistics are as of January 12th, and 20% of the positive cases that received genetic sequencing were of the Omicron variant. But we need to keep in mind that these numbers are delayed. In other words, they're reflecting what happened the week prior. And so what's happening now is probably a much higher percentage. And I think by the end of this week probably is when we'll start to see Omicron become the dominant strain. The percentage in terms of how much of the cases are Omicron, that percentage has been increasing by twofold to threefold on a weekly basis. And so this is spreading quite quickly. And this is basically very similar to what's going on overseas. We do have a little bit of a buffer going on, I think, in Korea because of our distancing measures, because of our high vaccination rate. But it does seem inevitable that Omicron will become the dominant strain within the next few weeks.
Then I must ask, Professor, how is the treatment method different for patients with Omicron and Delta here in South Korea? And for those who have Omicron but are asymptomatic, what is the protocol?
Well, so we're revising the protocol, and it's not necessarily based on whether or not you have Omicron, because of course, not all positive cases will receive genetic sequencing. So we will be sort of going on the assumption that once Omicron becomes more dominant, that the case will be Omicron positive. But this is really going on an assumption. But basically, we are expecting a huge deluge in positive cases. Medical resources, testing resources, even though they will be ramped up, they are still limited. And so in terms of the initial treatment, if you are low risk and asymptomatic, then treatment will be done at home. So it will be home isolation for 7 days. It will be mandatory and monitored. And then for 3 days subsequent, as long as there are still no symptoms, then it will be sort of a self-monitored isolation, not mandatory. In terms of treatment, if a person is high risk and they have symptoms, mild or moderate symptoms, then of course Paxlovid, which was recently introduced into our country, that will be prescribed. There is also going to be a protocol in place for the early use of remdesivir, possibly in the monitored isolation facilities that we have. Now, this all depends, of course, on the risk of the individual to develop severe disease, but also on the risk of transmission within the household. So if there is a high-risk individual in the same household as a positive case, such as a pregnant woman or a person with a frail medical condition or elderly age, then even if the person is low risk, the person who's infected is low risk, then monitored facility isolation will be the rule.
Now, finally, Doctor, we just wanted to touch upon the recently approved Novavax vaccine here in South Korea. It is different from the mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna, but for people who might not know exactly what the differences are, could you lay them out for us in as simple a language as you possibly could?
Sure. So an mRNA vaccine is basically we're giving the body the recipe or a message for how to make the spike protein within our bodies. Novavax is a recombinant protein vaccine. In other words, the spike protein has been made in the factory, and that's what's being delivered into the body via the vaccine. It is also an adjuvanted vaccine. In other words, there's a special chemical that's been added to the vaccine that enhances the immune response. In the phase 3 clinical trials, it was found to be highly effective, 100% effective against, I say efficacious, against preventing moderate to severe disease, which is fantastic. More than 90% vaccine efficacy against infection. Now, we do need to keep in mind that the phase 3 clinical trials were held before Omicron was dominant, but it was found to be effective against the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta strains. In subsequent tests that the Novavax company performed on their vaccine, it was shown that 3 doses of the Novavax vaccine showed high neutralizing ability, so high immunogenicity rates against the Omicron variant. But we should keep in mind that it takes 6 months for a person to actually receive 3 doses, because the protocol is the first dose, then 21 days later is the second dose, and then 6 months later is the third dose. So who knows what variant will be the dominant strain by the time a person receives their booster shot of Novavax. In any case, 2 doses does seem to offer at least some protection against Omicron. It is a safe and effective vaccine, and I'm very glad that it will be available in our country.
All right. As always, Dr. Tan, thank you so much for your insights. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.